Howdy ho and a yo ho ho. Welcome to our presentation, Good to Great, Why Some Companies Make the Leap and Others Don't. Written by Jim Collins and presented by Tim Christensen.
Katie Erno.
Colby Ibsen.
So here's our fancy smanchy table of contents. We have chapter 3, chapter 4, and summary. So let's dive straight into it. Chapter 3, first who, then what? Here is the age-long question that employers have been facing ever since the dawn of entrepreneurialism. Who is the right person to hire? And we could all think of people who seem better than others, others who seem worse than others, and it's a hard question to answer. But thanks to Mr. Jim Collins, we have some solutions. Jim Collins says, good to great leaders begin the transformation by first getting the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus, and then figure out what way to drive it. So what I like about this is first you get the people on the bus. This is the overarching concept of chapter 3 is first get the right people on before you set your direction. And once you have the right people on, you know where you're headed. Pretty fancy, right? Then here are the 3 points of getting the right people on the bus. This is why you get the right people on the bus. Is the right people better adapt when you need to change direction. The right people will manage themselves. And you have the wrong people, you won't have a great company. Better people are just better people. And yeah, not much else to say about that one. One of my favorite parts of this chapter was Jim Collins talking about Nucor's structure. Nucor is a steel company, and their philosophy is hire farmers to work in the steel industry. They teach that you can teach farmers how to make steel, but you can't teach a farmer work ethic to people who don't have it in the first place. Then we have ruthlessness versus rigor. This is towards the end of the chapter where Mr. Collins is like, there's a difference between ruthless and rigorous. As in ruthless will fire people without cause and there'll be all sorts of business punks. While rigor, they have a purpose in mind and they aren't playing with people's lives. They'll fire and they'll be harsh, but they'll have the right people on their bus to help them get in the right direction. A great example of this is the Wells Fargo and Crocker takeover. Wells Fargo took over Crocker, the company, and they pretty much laid off everyone. That they laid off people who just were not right fit for the company. They said it wasn't a merger, it was a takeover. And so they were willing to put their foot down, and then that produced a ton of success. What's interesting is they also got rid of their own Wells Fargo people. So things happen like that. So here's the synopsis of the chapter. When in doubt, don't hire, keep looking. You want to get the right people on the bus at the right time and get the wrong people off the bus really quickly. That's chapter 3.
So I'll be going over chapter 4, which is a lot about confronting the brutal facts and just keeping on the right path and not wavering from it. First part of this chapter starts to talk about two companies, A&P and Kroger. There are two grocery stores that were very large in the early 20th century before the Great Depression and that time frame. They, as time went on, people started wanting different interests and stuff. They wanted a different type of store. They wanted to have a one-stop shop. So they wanted to be able to get their fresh produce, their fresh bread, their cold medicine. They wanted a supermarket, is what the term actually became around. Kroger started towards after the Great Depression and into the 50s and so on. They started to find the supermarket chain was doing better and actually scrapped all of their other stores and only had their supermarket. They went through and redesigned everything. Whereas A&P, which is their competitor, have only stayed the same and not changed at all with what they had been doing. As you can see from the slides, Kroger and A&P have been around for a long time. They have seen a lot of different things and have changed and adapt, but A&P did not make the adaptation like Kroger did, and that was a huge part of this chapter. Part of it is facing the facts is the big part of this chapter. Is it luck or is it a process? If you look at Kroger and A&P and some of these other companies that are mentioned in this chapter, it talks about it almost it's if they come across it as luck. They all had the same information and everything coming across, but they did not make the same decisions at all. So as you analyze Kroger, especially, you'll see that it was more designed as a decision on facts that they had to face. Okay, do we change? Do we stay the same? What do we do? What are these huge changes we need to make? Biggest part of facing these facts is make sure you take it in your entire process of your business, not just having it as one aspect or another. You have to take it across the board. Next big part of this chapter is they talk about leaders of the CEOs and the top management. One of the biggest things they talked about was charisma. Being too charismatic can actually be a liability, as said in the book. It's just as much as an asset as liability. There can be many good things about a leader being very charismatic. They have decision making, they have the final say. But on the opposite end of it, they do not have their lower level people talking to them and giving them the information that they need to hear, those brutal facts, as I talked about in the previous slide, that we can't ignore those at all. It's those hard decisions that each leader has to face and come up with. One of the big leaders that the book talked about was Winston Churchill. During World War II, especially, he was a very charismatic leader that was a great example of having a good balance. He knew when to lead and take charge and make a final decision, but he also knew he needed to listen to his people and listen to his lower level people and understand the facts of everything. And part of this, to go along with the charismatic leader, is you need to have a climate and a culture where this meshes and everybody's together and works together. There was four things that the book talked about. The first was lead with questions, not answers. What this means is the leader taking charge and going, I know I don't know everything that I need to know. I know other people know more than me. All I know is I need to have the right questions before I can get the answers we need to change the company for the better. One example that the book talked about was non-agenda meetings. So what that means is a meeting where you walk in, it's not, okay, what's this answer to this quota? Where are we at? No, it's, okay, how are you doing? What are your thoughts? And the leader having a discussion with the lower level employee. Second thing it talked about was engaging in dialogue and debate. This goes a lot with the first one, leading with questions, not answers. You want to talk with your employees and have a discussion, debate, go through all the possible solutions, not just have the leader say, no, this is what we're doing because this is what I want to do. A leader will listen and take into account everybody. The third point here is conduct autopsies without blame. This means taking the blame when you need to. So if there's something that goes wrong, you're not just blaming everybody else. Well, they didn't give me the right answers. They didn't give me this. They didn't give me that. It's, no, this is my fault. I should have done this better. A great leader will do that and take a company from good to great. The fourth point here is build red flag mechanisms. And that is having the same information as everybody else, but finding the red flags of, okay, this isn't right. What do we need to do about this? The example that was given in the book, the author was teaching a class and gave his students red flags to throw up in the air when there was a question or something he said didn't make sense. So it brought up more questions and more discussion. The last part of this chapter is talking about unwavering faith from those brutal facts, not turning away from the facts at all. The book talked about what's called the Stockdale paradox. It's where you have faith until the end, regardless of how difficult it becomes and what you have to confront with the facts, even if that means maybe shutting down a division or closing down plants or whatever it may be. That is chapter 4.
So now that we went over chapter 3 and 4 and what they're about, I'm just going to talk about how we link those to the things that we learned in class and things like that. So the first thing that really stood out to me in chapter 3 was when it was talking about human capital. So as Tim was saying earlier, in the book, it says if we get the right people on the bus and the right people in the right seats and the wrong people off the bus, then we'll figure out how to take it someplace great. Chapter 3 of this book really focuses on human capital and how important it is when making a good company into a great one. In chapter 9 of our textbook, it describes human capital and the different steps to ensure you're hiring the correct people. In class, we also learned that hiring the right people for the right positions is crucial for a firm to build a sustainable competitive advantage compared to other firms. Chapter 3 also talks about performance management and organizational change. Not only does it explain the importance of the correct people on your team, but it emphasizes the importance of having the correct leader, one that is able to motivate and inspire his or her team to get the job done right. In chapter 10 of our textbook about performance management, we'll learn about the different contexts in which an organization performs. Good to Great emphasizes that having a high performance context is extremely important. Therefore, there must be high support and trust between a manager and an employee, as well as it's extremely important for there to be high performance management as well. Not only that, but in chapter 11, organizational change, we learn the 4 characteristics of a change leader, which is listen, communicate, involve, and train. I would also argue that the managers and CEOs in Good to Great all have these characteristics and that is why they're able to achieve the successes that they did. In the books, it talks about how it's important to be rigorous and how you should be treating your employees as well. It gives 3 practical disciplines, which is when in doubt, don't hire, keep looking. Practical discipline number 2, when you know you need to make a people change, act. And lastly, put your best people on your biggest opportunities, not just your biggest problems. And then chapter 4, I would connect this to what we learned about in class about organizational change. After reading chapter 4 of Good to Great, the first concept from class that came to mind is this chapter 11. The very first step in the change process is dissatisfaction with the status quo, then creating a new model for the organization, and then creating a process for a change. Resistance to change is brought up multiple times in Good to Great. We see many companies not be able to make the leap from good to great because they decide that what they're doing is just good enough, or what we learned in class is satisficing. They don't try to reach for bigger and better things. Most of the time, this leads to failure of a company. One key component that these good to great leaders did was create dissatisfaction with the norm in their company. They made their employees want to be better and therefore made the entire company better as well. The book quotes, "There is nothing wrong with pursuing a vision for greatness. After all, the good to great companies also set out to create greatness. But unlike the comparison companies, the good to great companies continually refine the path to greatness with the brutal facts of reality." And then it also talks about organizational culture. In the chapter, it says, yes, leadership is about vision, but leadership is equally about creating a climate where the truth is heard and the brutal facts confronted. There's a huge difference between the opportunity to have your say and the opportunity to be heard. The good to great leaders understood this distinction, creating a culture wherein people had a tremendous opportunity to be heard and ultimately for the truth to be heard as well. Chapter 4 of the book not only is focusing on the change in an organization, but it's talking about the culture in an organization and the leaders who create this culture. In order for a company to be able to confront the brutal facts and profit off of them, there must be a climate or culture full of people willing to accept these hardships and work hard to fix them. I would say socialization plays a big part in the 4 practices listed previously. It is extremely important for employees in an organization to understand how work gets done and how they should interact in an organization as well. In class, we learned about the different aspects in understanding culture. including values and philosophy, boundaries, internal power structure, work rules and norms, and reward and punishment systems. In conclusion, I would say that these chapters showed us that despite all odds, as long as you have the right team by your side and the motivation to be the best, it is possible to take even the smallest of companies from good to great. All in all, we see in chapter 3 and 4 two very important aspects for taking a company from good to great. We see a wide array of successful companies and how they implemented these concepts, like the ones we learned in class, into their business strategy and the amazing effects they had on overall success of the company. Companies that continue to thrive today, like Wells Fargo, Kimberly-Clark, Kroger, Gillette, and Fannie Mae, all use these strategies in their business, and that's why they were able to be as successful as they were.